Hello and welcome to this edition of Wineskins. I'm Father Jim Korda. Wineskins is a program that features reflections on the lives of the saints and the sacred scriptures, along with a variety of issues and topics, all from a Catholic perspective. Wineskins is brought to you by the annual Diocesan Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts, a division of the Society of St. Paul. On our program today, I will interview Steve Kramer. We will also hear more information on St. Bernard, and today, as the Church celebrates a 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we will get a deeper insight into those particular Sunday readings. That and more on Wineskins. In our current issue segment, we will hear about vocations. With me now is Father John Sheridan. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
We're going to spend a little time talking about vocations, and primarily your vocation. I know that you're from Boardman, from St. Charles Church, actually now St. Catherine of Siena Parish. And so whatever and whenever your vocation started, it took place there. So let's talk about that and just kind of reminisce with us a little bit.
As you said, I grew up at St. Charles Parish at the time, now St. Catherine of Siena. I went to school at St. Charles, and all of the extracurricular things that we were involved in my family were pretty much at the church. Mm-hmm. My parents were very well involved, and so it seemed like if we weren't at home, we were at church. Mm-hmm. I went to school at church, I did activities at church, and so it was very much part of my life growing up to be at the church, to be around the priests. And we had, in those days, many priests were coming through as young parochial vicars right after their ordination. So people like now Bishop Keener, Father Poor, lots of priests in their first assignment came through St. Charles and visited the school and made a lasting impact on kids there, including myself. So I just look back very fondly at that time, and certainly those moments of encounter with the priests impacted me to think that this was a joyful way of life and one that the Lord seemed to be calling me to.
As you were talking, one thing that comes to mind is that we know that the vocation is a gift. It's not something that we earn, or it's not something that we're given because of who we are, what we do. But there's a little more to it, because there's a sense of being welcomed and encouraged into that, and that whole discernment process to understand that, is this right for me? Is this the direction I should go? So how does that all play into it?
It's interesting that as I felt myself that the Lord was calling me to that, also at the same time other people started saying to me, I think you would make a good priest, or I think you should consider the priesthood, including my pastor at the time, Father Venglaric. He was instrumental in making me take pause and think about whether the Lord might be calling me. And I took that as sort of a sign that this wasn't just something going on in my mind. Right. It was indeed from the Lord, that other people were also thinking the same thing or seeing the same things in me.
And how important is it to have that support not only from priests and pastors, but also from family and friends?
I think for me it was really instrumental. My family is very close, and so to have their support, to know that they would continue to support me even in the priesthood, that was really helpful for me to know and to feel. But also having the support of the priests that I would one day serve among was great, because then I knew that I would be a true brother to them when the time came, and that's certainly how I feel now.
And I think the other thing is vocation is something that we need to not only nourish within ourselves, but nourish within other people, as you had previously mentioned. How do we do that among our young people today? We do know that there's not a lot of young men coming into the seminaries and the priesthood, but what can we do as priests to encourage a vocation to the priesthood?
I think there are lots of things we need to be doing. First of all, we need to continue to pray for vocations, but also to have courage to reach out and say, I see these qualities in you that I think could be useful in the ministry of the church. Have you ever thought about that? I think sometimes we're afraid to approach young people and to say that, but I think that approach from others really impacted me, and so I feel like it's important that we not fear doing that.
As you were talking, the other thing that comes to mind is that while we're blessed with vocations here in our diocese, not in numbers but in quality, we have a lot of young men who are studying now for the priesthood. We don't see a lot of second career vocations as we did in the past. Is there a reason for that?
I think each generation is different in how it approaches the church. The generation that was growing up at the time of the Second Vatican Council, people were entering the seminary even in high school.
Right.
And then there was a time after that in the 1980s that people would, go to college and then at college maybe encounter the Lord there and discern the call then. In my time, a lot of people were entering right out of high school, but also some that had been out in the world working. It just seems that the Lord gets us when He needs us,
Right.
and we all come at different times to Him.
Just a final thought, especially with the folks that are with us, what they can do primarily to encourage and to foster vocations.
Yeah, I think, again, continuing to pray for vocations, but also to look around in your parish. If you're going to Mass regularly and you see these young people out there that seem to be faithful and regularly showing up, praying and behaving in ways that you think are admirable, speak to them and thank them for what they're doing.
Father John Sheridan, thank you so much for sharing your vocation with us, but also with the church and with the Lord and with the faithful.
Thank you.
For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Korda. Saint Bernard was a French abbot and doctor of the church. To tell us more is Ron Puhalla. He is from St. Mary Magdalene Parish in Youngstown.
Saint Bernard of Clairvaux was a central figure of the 12th century, a Cistercian abbot, mystic, and doctor of the Church, whose influence shaped European theology and politics. Known as the mellifluous doctor for his honey-sweet eloquence, Bernard was a master of Christian rhetoric who emphasized that the measure of love is to love without measure. Bernard was born into nobility, but famously chose a life of extreme austerity. When he entered the struggling monastery at Citeaux in 1113, he did not come alone. His charismatic pool was such that he brought 30 of his own relatives and friends with him. At just 25 years old, he was sent to found a new abbey in a location he named Clairvaux, or the Valley of Light. Under his leadership, the Cistercian order experienced explosive growth, expanding from a handful of monks to 343 monasteries across Europe by the time of his death. While Bernard cherished the silence of the cloister, his reputation for wisdom forced him into the public eye. He served as a trusted advisor to kings and popes, helped heal major church schisms, and even drafted the rule for the Knights Templar. His theological works, particularly his Sermons on the Song of Songs and on Loving God, are considered masterpieces of mystical literature that focused on a personal, experiential friendship with Christ. Bernard is also remembered as a doctor of Mariology. He reviewed the Virgin Mary as a star of the sea who guides believers to Christ and is strongly associated with the spirit of the Memorare prayer. His deep devotion presented Mary as the perfect model for both monastic and lay Christian life. Bernard died on August 20th, 1153 at Clairvaux. He was canonized just 21 years later and named a doctor of the Church in 1830. Today, he is the patron saint of beekeepers, candle makers, and Gibraltar. His feast day is August 20th. For Wineskins, I'm Ron Puhalla.
With me is Deacon Steve Kramer, who is the Director of Homiletics at Sacred Heart Seminary in Milwaukee and also in for the First Friday Club. Welcome to our show.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, I know that as a permanent deacon, you've been ordained over 30 years, so you're well into this ministry of service. And coming to the First Friday Club, your talk is on evangelization. Yes. You know, I remember as a young priest 47 years ago that evangelization was really kind of a new term from an old concept, obviously, but it's been revitalized, and I think in a very synodal way, too. Why is evangelization so crucial to who we are as Catholic Christians?
Well, it's funny that you say that it's a new term, but a new way. You know, we have the new evangelization under John Paul II, and then we've had it in every pope since then. And we still talk about the new evangelization. Yeah. I don't know if it's new. We've always been evangelizers.
Right.
That's who we are as Catholic Christians. Why is it important? We're really following the footsteps of the apostles, of the first disciples, if we don't share our love of Jesus Christ. what are we doing here? That's really our main goal.
And part of your First Friday presentation was also encountering the Lord, encountering Jesus. And isn't that what evangelization is all about? Because we come in contact with people who embody Jesus because we believe that the Lord dwells within us. So how important in any encounter that we have that we understand that we're looking oftentimes at the face of Jesus.
In my talk this afternoon, I'll get into it more detail, but for myself as a deacon, working in a secular profession for let's call it my first 16 years of ministry, I was in the construction business. I was a stair builder, building beautiful wooden staircases and railings. And I'm going to say that I did as much ministry there as I did in the church. And I was in a very, very busy parish in New York. I mean, probably baptized 200 kids a year.
Yeah.
But realistically, it was often enough on a job site that I would meet people who were hurting or people who needed advice, and not wearing it on my sleeve that I was a deacon. Some guys knew, but you know, I was on different sites every day. But invariably, somebody would say, "Go talk to that guy over there. He's somebody from the church. I don't know what he does, but he's somebody from the church." And that would help bring about an encounter with Christ.
And isn't that often one-on-one situation?
Yes.
You know, when I think of the ministry of Jesus, his contact with people was oftentimes a one-on-one situation. Even in the Gospels, we hear sometimes how he takes people away from the crowds to minister to them. So that's really a beautiful image. When we talk about evangelization, how come it's difficult for some people to understand that they are evangelizers? Because when people in their mind think about it, they think of like a street corner preacher.
Exactly.
It's not what evangelization is all about. It's really a way of life.
Absolutely. And when we think about that street corner preacher, there are plenty of people who do that. And it's funny because in the seminary, as you know, my main position is as director of homiletics. My doctorate degree is in preaching and communication. But my secondary role is I'm the director of recruitment. So I work with bishops and vocation directors around the country to bring in older vocations. A lot of my evangelization, believe it or not, at this point in time, is working with men who are discerning, you know, maybe to move to a different diocese because perhaps their diocese doesn't accept somebody who's over, pick a number, 40 or 50, whatever it might be. But prior to coming to Milwaukee 12 years ago, I spent 4 years as the director of pastoral care for a big 138-bed Catholic nursing facility out east. A lot of evangelization there, not necessarily to the residents of the nursing home, but a lot of that was to the folks who worked there and their families.
Yeah. You know, that whole sense of a second career, I like to pick up on that. We know in the church today that we have what I like to refer to as fewer priests. I don't like to always see it as a crisis of vocations, but there's fewer of us doing the work that needs to be done. And yet the call continues to go out. It's discerning the call. Sometimes the call comes to people at an early age. Sometimes it comes, for example, in my life when I was in later years in high school. And sometimes it comes, the call, to those that are looking for a second career. Is that different, or is that something that's unusual, or is that typical?
Well, to be honest, God calls us at different points in life. Whether we accept the call at that moment, that's a different story. Because he might have called you in high school or in college, but then different things happened. Some guys got married, some went into the military for 25 years and stayed single, whatever the case is. But the call is still there. I'll share with you a really quick story. I have one particular vocation director for a diocese on the East Coast that sends men to us on a regular basis, typically older guys. This particular vocation director, he himself is, I guess, probably now in his later 40s. And he was a, quote, later vocation. I think he was ordained at 34 or something like that. But one of his classmates was 36. So he was an even older vocation. And his classmate died at age 38. And it always stuck in his mind. He said, you know, we never know how many years of ministry we have. He says, so when I give him somebody who's like 50 years old or 55 years old, he's always willing to look at the gentleman and help him to discern. Because he says, who knows how many years of ministry any of us have. I think that's just a beautiful way of looking at it, because I have so many men who have come through our seminary over the years they weren't ordained till 60 or 65. And then they put in 15 to 20 years worth of ministry.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, as we look at, in retrospect, our ministry in terms of years, that's really unfair sometimes because different things happen in those years. And so what's important is we could go back to understanding that at this point in my life, this happened, or another point in my life, this happened. But it's all of that in a culmination of events to celebrate. So I think years is really ancillary when you think about that.
Definitely.
The thing is responding to the call. What would you like to tell the folks that are with us, primarily about vocations? I know that's really not your talk for First Friday.
Sure.
We're going to go back to that at a later time. But talk about the discernment process, but what they can do to help others discern their vocation call.
And again, we got to look at vocations in a number of ways. Typically, we look at vocations to the priesthood, to the religious life, to the diaconate, but there's also the priesthood of all believers as well.
Right.
And so each of us has a particular role in bringing Christ to others. But specifically to ordained ministry, let's say, to continue to pray. I mean, whether it's going to have a holy hour someplace, in each individual parish, I find for vocations, it is almost invariably anybody who has a vocation story, it's somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, hey, have you ever thought about the priesthood? Have you ever thought about the diaconate? Have you ever thought about religious life? To be an encourager is to be an evangelizer. To me, that's the key thing.
Amen. That's exactly what happened in my life and my vocation. Well, Deacon Steve Kramer for the First Friday Club, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We look forward to your presence next month on our show.
Very good. Thank you for having me.
For Wineskins, I'm Father Jim Korda. For more pertinent information and to listen to Wineskins, visit CatholicEcho.org. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at CatholicEcho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
Our song today is from the CD called There Can Be Miracles. It is by the Daughters of St. Paul.
Yeah.
As we celebrate this 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll hear more about the sacred scriptures by Sister Regina Rogers. She is an Ursuline sister of Youngstown.
In today's gospel account, Jesus struggles with boundaries. He withdraws from Israel to Canaanite country, and a Canaanite woman comes and asks him to heal her daughter. The Canaanites were not Jews. They were pagans who worshipped many gods. Most Jews would back away from Canaanite people. They would not interact with them. At first, Jesus seems to follow this approach. He does not respond to the woman, and when she presses her case, he insults her, calling her a dog. But the woman's persistence and faith win out in the end. Jesus reaches across the boundary of religion, race, and gender and shows the woman an example of God's all-inclusive love. In this story, we see some interesting things happen. First, we see Jesus just ignoring the Canaanite woman. But notice, he refuses to send her away. He does not tell her to leave him alone, nor does he tell his disciples to get rid of her, even though his disciples see her as a nuisance. Only after her persistence does Jesus engage in conversation with this woman. He tells her that his mission is to the house of Israel. In other words, his ministry is only to the Jewish people. But this unclean outsider does not quit. She calls him Lord and does him homage, an action that would be taken in the presence of royalty. Matthew uses this action to say something important. Kneeling is not only a sign that one is in the presence of royalty, but also a recognition of that person's power. There is a connection between those who kneel before Jesus and the healings that Jesus performs. But again, this pagan woman cries out for Jesus to heal her daughter. How much she loved her daughter, and how frightened she was to lose her. But in the face of this woman's desperation, Jesus compares her to a dog. Again, so unlike Jesus. But her response is so profound. She picks up on Jesus' own words. She says, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." She wants just one thing, and she believes that it amounts to no more than crumbs, considering the amazing power Jesus has been demonstrating in his healing of so many. She wants just a crumb, recognizing that even a crumb is powerful enough to defeat the demon that has possessed her daughter. So what is a point of reflection for us? We live in a world marked by division, marked by the haves and have-nots. The words that the scriptures often use to mark these differences are those who are clean and those who are unclean. In the beginning, Jesus ignores the woman. He even insults her. After all, she is a Canaanite. She is unclean in the eyes of the Jewish people. But then we see Jesus struggle with these boundaries, these divisions. When he sees this woman's faith, Jesus comes to understand that God is calling him not only to minister to his own Jewish people, but to the Gentiles as well. Today, we live in a world where people are identified by labels. We need to realize that we are influenced by our culture, that we carry negative attitudes and prejudices against people, that we judge others by their nationality, their color, what political party they are affiliated with, if they are rich or poor. For a while, even Jesus participates in these prejudices, but the woman persists, and in time, Jesus recognizes her faith in him. He sees in her a genuine woman of faith. What Jesus does in this gospel story is what we are called to do. We are asked to deal with people not through the labels they have been given, but as the people they are. As Christians, we understand that divisions are not according to God's will. We are called to build God's kingdom, a kingdom where all are sons and daughters of a loving God. To do this, we must first identify who in our life is the stranger, the Canaanite, the unclean. Then, following the example of Christ, we must reach across that boundary and offer an example of God's love and healing. Even Jesus changed his mind about this Canaanite woman. He talks with her, albeit harshly at first, and finds in her a person of deep faith in him and in his power. Because of her, Jesus changes his mission. May we follow the example of Jesus and never confuse the labels from the real person whom we encounter in our everyday lives. For Wineskins, this is Sister Regina Rogers.
It may be good that St. Matthew preserved this difficult story for us in today's gospel. If nothing else, it reminds us of a basic truth. Just like this persistent woman in today's story, many of life's problems will not go away. We must face them and deal with them day after day and year after year. Wineskins is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. It is brought to you by the annual Diocesan Appeal, the Catholic Communication Campaign, and St. Paul's Catholic Books and Gifts. I'm your host, Father Jim Korda, wishing you a beautiful week.
What have you done for your marriage today?
I gave my wife a hug this morning. I thought I love her.
I did her hair this morning. I think it looks pretty good.
I cooked my husband's favorite breakfast.
I bought her an orchid.
What have I done for my marriage today? I sent my husband a love email.
I read the newspaper to my wife, and it cracked her up. She's still laughing.
What have you done for your marriage today? Make a change for the better. Need help? Go to foryourmarriage.org, a message from the Catholic Church.
They say America is the land of opportunity, but for some, life isn't so easy. Right now in America, 1 in 6 children lives below the poverty line. That's nearly 13 million children of all races, all across our country. Where do you draw the line and get involved? You can make a difference in more ways than you think. Go to povertyusa.org today, because 1 in 6 children in poverty is one too many. A message from the Catholic Campaign for Human Development.